I was about to do this update on Pokrovsk, and this was not the video I thought I was going to be recording, but it turns out dozens of Russians have surrendered. I'll explain that story in just a little bit. First, in total, over the past day, 169 combat engagements have been recorded, the most on the Pokrovsk direction, where defenders stopped 58 assault actions. So that's where the battle is heaviest. The battle for Donbass is now fought with small arms and smaller drones. Men in teams of 2 or 3 are slipping into Pokrovsk, many in civilian clothing, and so that's how they've changed their tactics. Instead of a big heavy armored assault, that's how they slipped into the city and are creating havoc. Okay, now this is the most recent map from Ukraine, and so this is a deep state map. There's about a 3-kilometer space here that is not in this contested gray zone. The red is Russian, the gray is contested, about 3 kilometers where the Ukrainians could slip through and out of there. But it's also covered by FPV drones. Okay, there's FPV drones all over here, and they're going to have to run this gauntlet when they're getting out. But they're not trying to get out just yet. Now, by the way, this is what it looks like today. This is what it looked like a month ago. So you can see the difference between today and a month ago. And yeah, it's a big difference. Okay, let's look at this. ISW says that Russia's Pokrovsk offensive is bleeding its forces while Moscow keeps doubling down. Yeah, that's what the Ukrainians are trying to do. And by the way, if you don't know who I am, my name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. I do these every day. Please consider subscribing if you want to stay informed. Russia has committed large parts of the 2nd, 41st, 51st Combined Arms Armies to its narrow front, showing how far Russia will go to seize the pocket. Yep, they're really putting themselves all in. Russian military command, according to the ISW, is reportedly augmenting its troop presence in the Pokrovsk direction, likely to consolidate the gains Russian forces initially secured through its infiltration missions and advance further through the town. Russian forces are intensifying their battlefield air interdiction (BAI) campaign against Ukrainian railway infrastructure, seeking to disrupt Ukrainian rear logistics hubs to erode frontline forces and eventually facilitate frontline gains. So they're working at it. They're doubling down on it. General Alexander Syrsky launched a focused counterattack near Dobropilia to divert Russian attention from the brutal push on Pokrovsk. So what they're doing here is, if the Ukrainians just push over here, remember the bunny ears, this area up here that the Ukrainian army bagged a bunch of soldiers some time ago? Well, they bagged more soldiers in Pokrovsk, and I'll explain that in a moment. So they're pushing here, and then the Russians have to divert from here up here in order to make sure that they're not losing any ground there as well. So it's taking some of the pressure off in this pocket in Pokrovsk. Now, meanwhile, this happened. I'm not making this up. This is in Euromaidan Press just yesterday, late last night. Ukrainian drones operators mounted loudspeakers on FPV drones, flying low over Russian trenches and broadcasting surrender instructions. They really do that. Dozens of Russian soldiers surrendered after the broadcasts, with the footage showing them following drone instructions to Ukrainian lines. About that, they're the lucky ones. Russian command attempted to send reinforcements from Pokrovsk and Mirnograd to prevent a breakthrough, but autumn and mud arrived at the worst possible time. Russian columns included armored vehicles, but they became bogged down and soaked in rain. Ukrainian HIMARS strikes and FPV drones destroyed the struck convoys. The operation achieved its objective of forcing Russian relocation away from Pokrovsk. Syrsky's plan aims to restore breathing room for Ukrainian defenders. And it looks like it's actually starting to work. Meanwhile, there are Russians out here that are surrendering. It's wild. Okay. This is Sean Pinner. Sean Pinner, I believe, is British, and he has been fighting in Ukraine. And he wrote this fascinating article just giving us great context about what's actually happening and why. Why do the Russians keep coming? Okay. Let's go through this. The walled farmhouse of the Hugomont in what is now Belgium was an obscure place before June 1815, when the British and Allied troops fought the French. Even as the smoke from the Battle of Waterloo wreathed the buildings, its critical significance was clear to both armies. The Duke of Wellington, the British commander, later said the success of the battle turned upon the closing of the gates at Hugomont. On a map, it looked like nothing, just a courtyard, a few stone walls, and some outbuildings. Yet holding Hougoumont tied down huge numbers of Napoleon's troops, disrupted his plan, bled his slow advance. Now you can see right there that is the strategy, tying down these troops, disrupting the plan, slowing and bleeding the advance. It wasn't Paris or a capital city that decided the day. It was the humble jumble of farm buildings. The Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk is now at the heart of Russian attempts to break and defend the defending army. Like Hougoumont, it's become well known through the war. We can tease out some parallels, and that's what he's going to do here. Now, let me be clear. I don't believe that if Pokrovsk were to fall and Russian forces are inside the city, the war would suddenly flip in Russia's favor. I showed you a number of articles the other day. Phillips O'Brien was talking about, look, it's not even strategic. I mean, you don't want to lose it, but it's not a strategic. Like if the Russians had Kharkiv, that would be strategic. If the Russians had Kyiv, that would be strategic. This isn't. There's no single gate that decides the fate of a nation in a day. Its loss would hit morale. It certainly would. To lose Pokrovsk is going to, when that happens, if it happens, and given enough time and momentum or pressure from the Russians, it would. But it would hit morale. It would give Russia a propaganda moment. Certainly, absolutely it would. Pokrovsk represents a place where Russia feels it must win, and where Ukrainian armed forces are making them pay dearly for trying. That's the strategy from the Ukrainian side. Mariupol was the same story writ large. Stay and make the Russians pay, or run and let them dictate the war's tempo. We chose to stay. It was ugly, it was costly, and it worked. The longer we held on, the more Russia's timetable frayed, the more their manpower stretched, and the more the world watched. Some argued that had we not held out as long as we did, Kyiv might have fallen. The eastern city of Bakhmut was also providing another chapter in the same lesson. The point was never merely to defend a name on a map. It was to turn the attackers' momentum into a liability, and that's exactly what they did. He says, I know what it feels like to be among the last standing in a pocket, to feel the pressure of numbers and the cold certainty that your job is not to hold ground for glory, but to exhaust the enemy. This is what Ukrainians are doing in Pokrovsk. That's why they're still there. Now, where you are asking that kind of question, like, why didn't they just get out? For several weeks, even while cut off, facing overwhelming force, we kept that purpose in our heads: make them pay for every meter. For Ukraine, the logic of this war has never changed, despite many foreign pundits failing to understand the reality or the tactics. Make Russia pay dearly for every meter and force them to bleed for ground. In Pokrovsk, that strategy is paying dividends. Pokrovsk was a transport hub. What remains is not a city, but a position, its roads, supply routes, and terrain. So the real question isn't why is Ukraine defending Pokrovsk? It's why is Russia throwing everything it has to take it? It's really a good question. I mean, it's not a big city. The answer lies in desperation-driven optics. It's optics. Putin needs the win. Putin needs a trophy. Pokrovsk offers him something to point at on state TV, a talking point, a symbol, a narrative of progress before winter with its mud and frost when it locks the front in place. That's what's about to happen. Ukrainian commanders estimate that around 110,000 Russian troops are concentrated toward Pokrovsk. Russian daily losses here peak up to 700 to 800. This is not a 3-day special operation. It's an industrial era attrition. Putin isn't winning ground. He's spending lives. That's right. Politically, he's cornered. His attempt to charm Donald Trump and the pressure in Kyiv has failed. Sanctions continue to squeeze a Russian economy hobbled by sky-high interest rates. I saw the preparations around Pokrovsk myself, he says. Layered defenses, tank ditches, dragon's teeth, deep mine belts, razor wire stretching to the horizon. Behind them, drones, artillery, armor, infantry. If Russia gets in, it will inherit rubble and flat open ground, providing perfect killing field for any defenders taking up new positions. This is not a springboard, it's a trap. That's quite a perspective, and potentially means that Russia will have to go through the same grinding process once again. If Ukraine holds, Putin heads into winter empty-handed. That's right. If Ukraine can hold. Now, I don't know that they will. Maybe time's running out, but if they can, wouldn't that be a kick in the pants? If he takes it, he only gains another graveyard and shattered morale. We fight for survival. Russia fights for optics. That difference matters. So, yes, we are still fighting for Pokrovsk because in a war like this, you trade the enemy's ambition for their lifeblood. Putin is running out of men, time, and stories. And the capture of Pokrovsk, Ukraine's 76th largest town, like it's tiny, won't change that. All right. I hope that provides some context. Last couple of things. Russia's reinforcing Pokrovsk with more troops as the ISW. Elite units are deployed and soldiers using bad weather and civilian disguises to reach their positions. They're in there. They're doubling down for the reasons that Sean was talking about. But as of now, Pokrovsk holds. Thank you for the time, my friends. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for subscribing, hitting that like button. Thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.